Hi, this is Ian DJ, RavenFox13. For this session, I'll be using my regular Koi watercolor field box set and some strips of watercolor paper. Always have at least 2 water containers whenever you're doing watercolors. One would be where you will be cleaning the brush, or one would be a source of clean water. Always make sure that you also have a cotton rag or a paper towel where you will be wetting and cleaning your brush. Okay? So, let's start. The first thing you need to do is to reactivate the watercolors. You can do that by just pressing or putting colors like this in your watercolor pans. So let's choose a bright color for this. This one is my favorite. It would be easier if you would be doing this to your watercolor pans before using it. And then, try to transfer the colors in the mixing plate first. Like this. So I'm using this color so that you can see it better on the camera. For our first technique, we will be using the first watercolor technique is called the wash. Usually when you're doing watercolors, you can do different kinds of techniques by adding more water, or waiting for it to dry, or by adding another color before everything dries. The first technique that is widely used is a wash. A wash is as simple as putting the colors, reactivated colors, using the brush into your paper, like this. This is called the flat wash. The flat wash is usually putting color, a flat version of the color, into the paper. As much as possible, you want to do this very quick so that there won't be any discolored parts. There. Always remember that the water tends to move depending on gravity. So if you tilt your paper, the water will tend to move that way. We will take advantage of that technique later. So the next technique that we will be doing is a wash with gradation. So it starts similar to a flat wash like that. But this time, we will try to add colors as we go through the space. So, it's like this. So, when you put the color in the paper, like that, instead of putting more paint, you add more water. To add more water, you just need to push the water brush a little bit, like this. See? And then just let the colors blend to the paper. As I've said, watercolor is a medium that tends to flow depending on how you tilt the paper. For this one, I am tilting the paper a little bit downward, angled, so that the excess paints would go on one side. Now this is a wash with gradation. You can see the light to dark color shift from our watercolor paints. Feel free to move the colors here and there. This is a good way to play and get to know your colors better. Always remember, there are different kinds of watercolor paints. Some paints dry very flat, and some paints dry with some texture. That would be depending on the pigment used for the watercolors and the kind of paper you are using. Both the first techniques are called wet on dry techniques. It means that we have used the watercolors on a dry paper or surface. Now, we will be doing a wet on wet technique. It means that the paper is already wet before you put all of the paints into the paper. So, first task is to wet the paper first with plain water like this. When you're using this technique, make sure that you are just trying to wet the paper enough for it to glisten in the light. So you don't want an overly wet paper for this. There. So let's just wait for this to dry a little so the paper would absorb the water. So we're doing this so that the paper would open up its teeth. Okay, let's use the same watercolor here from the mixture. Then let's try to drop in some color. See that? They look like small flowers or fireworks. So that's dropping in some colors. Now let's try to do some lines. Like that. So, depending on how wet the paper is, you will see here that the colors will react differently. Mostly, when you use this technique, you will see a feathering motion here. So the colors tends to blur a little bit when the paper is wet. On the other hand, when you look at the first techniques that we used, the lines are actually sharper, especially on the edges. This is very useful when you're doing wispy lines or you want your colors to look a little bit blurry. Let's put it here. The last technique that we would probably be using today is a variegated wash. So for that, we'll be using two colors. I'll try to reactivate another color here. So this is ultramarine blue, one of my favorite colors. Again, try to mix the color in the pan for a few seconds before you transfer it to the mixing plate. Here. Add a little bit of water. Remember, when painting watercolors, you want to add water to the paint. As much as possible, we want an effect that is translucent to semi-opaque whenever we're using watercolors to take advantage of the medium. Okay, So this is an example of a variegated wash. It's a wash where you combine two or more different colors and then just let them play on the paper. Example, using here yung blue, cleaning the brush and then getting the pink, that. So I'm just trying to play with the color. It would be nice if you could do that on the bead part. So the bead is the part where it's still wet, and then you just do the other color near that part. It's fun to do this, especially if you're playing with colors, useful for backgrounds, or even for filling up spaces in your work. This. So these are 4 of the techniques we will be using for our session for today. Flat wash, we have wash with gradation, the wet on wet technique, and a variegated wash.